Hey everybody, I'm back with Chapter 8 of Scooby Doo and the Skeleton Crew. We're going to go ahead and finish up this book this week and start Judy Bloom book next week. So we're going to read chapters 8, 9, and 10 today and talk about them on Thursday. Chapter 8, Lost and Found. Scooby and Shaggy hugged each other and cried. I can't believe it, Scoob, sobbed Shaggy. It's the worst thing ever. Rarible, replied Scooby-Doo. Rust rarible. Scooby stopped crying long enough to look back into the food locker. There was one snack left, tucked away in the corner. It was a big snack. Raggy, Rook, pointed Scooby. Oh boy, Scoob, Shaggy rubbed his hands together. They stepped inside and approached the large bag. What do you think it is? Asked Shaggy. Maybe it's a large smoked ham. Or a rag of relly beans, suggested Scooby. He licked his lips with his long, slobbery tongue. Shaggy untied the sack and let it fall open. Zoinks! Shouted Shaggy. Scooby-Doo jumped up and landed in Shaggy's arms. The wooden statue of Angus Grimm stood before them. Oh no, how did he get in a bag in the food locker? Check it out, Scoob. Shag knocked on the head of the statue. Knock, knock. Like, this is the real masthead, explained Shaggy. Someone must have hidden it in here in the food locker. Aroo, said Scooby. You're right, pal, agreed Shaggy. It's a clue. Let's free our friends and tell them about it. Shaggy and Scooby made their way toward the brig. When they got there, the cell was empty. Help, shouted Velma. Her voice came from a hole in the ceiling above them. Scooby and Shaggy quickly climbed out of the hole and into the moonlight. Once they were on the main deck, they spotted their friends. Greg and the others were hanging above the deck in a large net. The rope that held them led down to the deck and then back up the other net. The second net was full of all the stolen food. The food hung over the side of the ship. Shaggy and Scooby ran up to their friends, like, where's the Captain Woodenhead and his creepy skeletons? They're in the lower decks looking for you, replied Fred. Hurry and cut us down before they come back, said Velma. Shaggy looked from his friends to the large stash of food. Like, if I cut you down, the food will go overboard. Well, who would you rather save? Asked Daphne, your friends or the food? Shaggy rubbed his chin. Do I have to answer that? Shaggy! Shouted Daphne. Scooby-Doo grabbed a sword and cut through the rope. He captured his friends. His captured friends fell to the deck below. Thump. Then there was another loud noise. Splash. Shaggy and Scooby ran to the railing. They watched the food sink beneath the dark waves. After the food disappeared, Shaggy told the others about finding the missing masthead. Then I say we catch this phony pirate once and for all, said Velma. Fred held up part of the rope. This gives me an idea for a perfect trap, he said. Chapter 9, Sword Fight. Up on the bridge, the highest deck of the ship, Shaggy spun the big ship's wheel. The giant steering wheel made the ship lean to the left as it turned. Let me try, said Scooby-Doo. The dog spun the wheel in the other direction. The ship leaned to the right as the ship turned the other way. Like if that doesn't get them up here, I don't know what will, said Shaggy. Scooby-Doo tapped Shaggy on the shoulder. Raggy? Scooby pointed to one of the doorways, leading to the lower decks. It worked. Shaggy gulped when he saw Angus Grimm and 4 skeleton pirates step through the doorway behind them. The pirate growled at them. Run, Raggy! Shouted Scooby. He and Shaggy zipped down the stairs leading to the main deck. With the pirates close behind, they ran across the open deck. They also ran across the open net. Once Shaggy and Scooby were clear, Fred stood up from his hiding spot. Now, gang, he shouted. Greg, Daphne, and Velma each came out of hiding. They rolled heavy cannonballs toward Grimm and the skeletons. Velma laughed. Bowling for pirates! The cannonballs slammed into Grimm's feet, and he flew backward. He fell into the skeletons behind him. He knocked them all down as they piled onto the open net. Velma pumped her fists. Strike! Okay, everyone, on the rope, ordered Fred. Everyone ran to join Fred. They pulled on a large rope. The net closed around Grim and the skeletons. The net lifted them several feet above the deck. Fred tried the rope to the railing and dusted off his hands. Okay, now it's time to unmask. Suddenly, several swords jutted out of the trap. The pirates began cutting through the net. Velma looked up and scratched her head. Fred, you did know they had swords, right? She asked. Fred sighed. Yeah, I totally forgot about the swords. The pirates cut themselves free and fell to the deck. Angus Grim and his skeleton crew pointed their swords at the Mystery Inc. gang. Now what? Asked Stephanie. Here, shouted Greg. He ran up with an armload of swords. We'll beat them at their own game. The pirates charged toward them. Clank, 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 clank. Fred crossed swords with an angry skeleton. Velma and Greg fought off their own skeleton. Daphne jumped out of the way as a skeleton swung at her. Shaggy whimpered as a skeleton chased him around the deck. Like, they're way better at this game than we are, said Shaggy. Scooby Doo faced off against Angus Grim himself. The angry pirate struck Scooby's sword and knocked it out of his paw. Grim swung at Scooby again, but the dog was ready. His tail held another sword, and he blocked the blow. Grrr! The pirate growled as he knocked that sword away too. It was clear that the pirates were better at sword fighting than... They surrounded the gang and pushed them closer and closer to the edge of the ship. Clink, clank, clink, clank, clink. The pirates were winning. Chapter 10. Pirate Overboard. Greg and the Mystery Inc. gang stood with their backs to the railing. The pirates moved in from all directions. There was nowhere for the gang to go. We're surrounded, said Velma. I guess this is the end of Mystery Inc. We're doomed, all right, agreed Fred. Shaggy turned to Scoob. Like, it was nice knowing you, buddy. Scooby Doo wasn't there. Shaggy looked all around. Buddy? Pal? Rup! Rup here, Raggy, shouted Scooby Doo. The gang turned to see Scooby Doo standing on the bridge behind the ship's wheel. He wore a large captain's hat and a long coat. Roll on, said the dog ordered. Shaggy and the rest of the gang dropped their swords. They whirled around and held onto the railing. Scooby Doo spun the ship's wheel as hard as he could. The ship turned hard and tilted up on one side. The skeletons fell to the deck and slid across to the other side. Brrr, the statue of Angus Grim growled. He slowly climbed uphill toward the helpless gang. Just then, a loose cannonball rolled under his feet. The pirate lost his balance and slid across the deck with the skeletons. They all flew over the side and landed inside a hanging lifeboat. Ruby, Ruby, doo, shouted Scooby as he pulled a lever. The small lifeboat dropped to the ocean below. Splash! Everyone rushed to the side of the ship. They looked down to see Grim and the skeletons piled into a small boat. The boat floated next to the big ship. A thin rope kept it from drifting away. I think it's time to unmask the bad guys, said Velma. Brrr, Angus Grim growled up at her. Shaggy picked up a small cannonball. I learned a new trick today, he said. Like, do you want to play cannonball catch? Grim shook his head. Okay, you win, he shouted. Each of the skeleton crew removed its mask. It turned out that they each wore a tight black mask with a white skull painted on the cloth. Grim removed his mask too. The younger man underneath looked a lot like the angry pirate. How did you know they were wearing masks? Asked Greg. The first clue was the weird light bulbs all around the ship, explained Velma. Shaggy pointed up. Like there's no one up there in the sails, too. Those are called black lights, continued Velma. They only put out a little bit of light and make everything look creepy, she said. But they also make white things look as if they're glowing, added Daphne. So the skeleton crew were just men wearing tight black costumes with skeletons painted on them, finished Fred. The biggest clue was when Shaggy and Scooby found the real Angus Grim masthead, said Velma. That meant that someone was running around pretending to be the masthead come to life. Greg leaned over the side. So who are you, anyway? The man in the Grim costume frowned. I'm Duncan Grim. Angus Grim was my great-great-grandfather. So what are you doing on my ship? Asked Greg. Well, when I heard about your floating museum idea, I had to put a stop to it, continued Duncan. And I would have done it too if it weren't for you nosy kids. But why wouldn't you like an Angus Grim museum? Asked Fred. Duncan shook his head. I didn't want any more shame being brought to the family name. It's bad enough having a name like Grim, said Duncan. Well, you're staying put while we sail back to land, said Greg. We'll let the police sort this out. Greg turned back to the others. Is everyone ready to set sail for shore? You bet, said Fred. We're going to need a vacation to rest from this vacation, said Velma. We can't go yet, said Shaggy. He and Scooby wore full diving suits, with tanks, masks, and flippers. They walked over to the railing. Like, since all our food is sitting on the ocean floor, Scuba and I are going to dive down and get some snacks. Greg laughed at Shaggy. Don't worry, guys. Like I said, Fred told me all about you. That's why there's a whole other food locker full of food. Fred put a hand on Greg's shoulder. That should at least hold him for the trip back. He turned back to Shaggy and he looked around. Shaggy, Scooby. Shaggy and Scooby Doo were already on their way to the second food locker. All that was left was a pair of empty diving suits. The end. So it looks like the Mystery Inc. gang solved yet another mystery. So what I'd like to talk about Thursday is what kind of monster you think Scooby-Doo and Shaggy and the gang will face next. And also, I'd like to know where you think there might be some buried treasure. If you could think about those things and be ready to talk about them on Thursday, I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week.